Hi there, welcome to another week of Anatomy at SI. My name is Jayton Cranmore, and we're going to dive into the peripheral and autonomic nervous system today. Welcome to Laboratory 8. Here's Section 1. So here's a neuron, or a nerve cell, right? And this is going to compose all of Section 1, the structures of the neuron. Let's go ahead and start with the cell body. So, first of all, just kind of looking at this model, we see that we've got this starting structure right here. We've got this connecting structure, and it extends off into the graphic of this model, right? And then it inserts in onto a muscle over here, right? I said a lot of its and theys, but I promise I'm going to put some terms to those in a little bit. Okay, so the first structure that we want to kind of define is this largest structure right here. This is the soma, or the cell body, right? It's pretty easy to find on most models or drawings. And so here is the cell body, or the soma. Inside, we've got the nucleus, right? A neuron is just a cell, no different than any other cell in our body. Well, quite different from other cells in our body, but undifferent, right, or indifferent from other cells is that it has to have a nucleus. And so here is a nucleus of the neuron, and then inside of it, we've got these darker regions. That's the nucleolus. The nucleus houses DNA, whereas the nucleolus is going to help form ribosomes, just like in other cells. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the dendrites. Dendrites are going to be these tree-like branches that are coming off of the cell body, and they're capturing or accepting signals from other cells, right? Other neurons, like let's say this neuron up here sends a signal into this dendrite, right? This dendrite will capture that signal and bring it into the soma. That way it can be transferred into this cell's axon, right? Speaking of the axon, let's go ahead and define that structure. The axon is just like the tail of the neuron, right? It's this large connecting wire-like structure that's going to connect this nerve to this nerve to this nerve, and from this nerve to this muscle, right? All right. First, we've got the axon. The axon is going to be just the wire itself, that connecting rope, right? And that's where the signal is actually transported along from the cell body over into, in this case, a muscle cell. At the beginning of the axon, when it's connected to the soma, that's the axon hillock, right? So the axon hillock is kind of the start or beginning point of the axon, and then it funnels down into the main portion of the axon. One thing that's not shown on this model that you might be quizzed about is sometimes you can have axons that actually jut off of this side axon, right? So this main axon here can have an axon that juts off of it, right? And that jutting, or that extension off of this main axon, is called an axon collateral, right? So imagine if my pen was another axon, that would be an axon collateral extending off of the main axon. Okay. Next, we've got a neurofibril node, which is also called a node of Ranvier, right? Kind of depending on how dated the anatomy textbook that you're looking at is. And so this right here is a neurofibril node. And it's a space that's non-myelinated, right? This very slight little non-myelinated space on the axons that allow for a skipping or a jumping of that electrical current, right? Next, we've got the myelin sheaths. So I talked about how there were spaces in between the myelin, right? And so those spaces kind of, they create these cells or these areas of myelination, and then these small spaces of no myelination. And the areas that are myelinated are called myelin sheaths. So we've got a myelin sheath that covers the axon right here, and a node of Ranvier, or a neurofibril node, whatever you're calling it, right? Neurofibril node right here. Okay. Next, we've got the telodendria. So the telodendria will be found kind of at the end of this neuron, right? So if we follow the axon all the way along this graphic, right, all the way to the end, we find the telodendria. The telodendria are kind of the terminal branches of the end region of our neuron, and they end in synaptic knobs, which are going to administer neurotransmitters onto their effector targets, right? In this case, we've got muscle cells, and so it could be an acetylcholinergic, barely said it. Might be a receptor right there that is going to catch acetylcholine as it leaves the synaptic knob, right? So now that I know how to speak, let's go ahead and get started. I want to trace a nerve signal, right? So an action potential from this nerve here all the way through this nerve into its effector target, right? First, this nerve is going to transmit the signal into a dendrite on this neuron, right? So this neuron catches the signal with its dendrite, carries the signal along its nerve cell membrane, right, along the soma, and it gets captured by the axon hillock. That's going to focus the nerve signal, right, that action potential, and it focuses it into the axon itself, which is the wire of our nerve that carries the signal all the way down to the telodendria. The telodendria end in those synaptic knobs and administer acetylcholine or really any of the neurotransmitters that it might need to, just depending on what type of nerve this is, right? And don't forget that that neuron is wrapped by these myelin sheaths, right? Those fatty sheaths that help to insulate and keep the signal in there. Alrighty, let's go ahead and talk about what a nerve plexus is. All right, so the definition of a nerve plexus is a network of interwoven anterior rami, right? What does that mean? Let's talk about it, okay? So we've got ourselves a spinal cord, right? Or a cross section of one. And so what I want you to remember from when we talked about this structure before, right? We've got this main spinal cord, this middle region, and then we've got the roots that extend off the side, right? Those roots extend and then come together to form the anterior ramus, right? Or anterior rami. Here's the posterior ramus, and then here, right, this whole structure here is the anterior rami. And so that ramus is going to be what extends off of the spinal cord and then becomes the different plexuses that we're talking about throughout this whole unit, right? So for the first one, let's talk about the cervical plexus. The cervical plexus is going to originate on C1 and extend all the way through C4, right? So that means these different, right, on the spine, that means C1 through C4, right? C1 through C4 are going to contain all of the cervical plexus. They branch out into the cutaneous branches and the phrenic nerve. The cutaneous branches are just going to innervate some skin on our anterior neck, whereas the phrenic nerve, which is the main takeaway from our cervical plexus, right? This is what I want you to learn about the cervical plexus. The phrenic nerve innervates our diaphragm. So this is the nerve that helps us actually get our raise and fall in our lungs, right? With that diaphragm. It's super important that that nerve is working because we have to breathe. So that's really all we want you to know from the cervical plexus. The next one is the brachial plexus, and we actually have some really good models for that, so I'm going to try to show that to you now. All right, let's talk about the brachial plexus. So first, let's talk about all of the different nerves that extend off of the lateral cord. So first, we'll discuss the musculocutaneous nerve. Now, imagine that somebody walks up to you and they're like, hey, show me your guns, right? You're going to do that, right? You're going to show them your guns. Well, this is the nerve that actually does that motion for you. And so if I'm looking at the arm, right, this nerve right here is the musculocutaneous nerve. It travels kind of up into that subclavian area, right? And then it attaches onto the brachial plexus via the lateral cord. But the biggest thing that I want you to know about this musculocutaneous nerve is that it innervates our anterior brachial compartment, right? So all of those anterior upper arm muscles, like our our brachialis, and then also our biceps brachii. Okay, that's the musculocutaneous nerve. Now let's talk about the median nerve. The median nerve, if I take this whole arm and then I showed it to you from this angle, right? If I look down on the middle of our forearm, we can see like radius is on this side, ulna's on this side. I've got the median nerve right down the middle, and it splits, but that's the median nerve. It travels down to the center of our hand, and it's going to innervate our anterior forearm compartment. So we've talked about the musculocutaneous nerve, which innervates our anterior anterior brachial region compartment, and then now we have the median nerve, which innervates our forearm in the anterior compartment, right? Okay, now let's talk about the posterior cord. This involves the radial nerve and the axillary nerve. So the axillary nerve is going to have to do with our armpit, kind of, right? It innervates our armpit region and then also up and around that shoulder joint. And so you can see where it starts, or kind of where it's coming off of the main branch of nerves, and that's right here. That's where the axillary nerve is going to start. It wraps up underneath that teres minor, right? If we flip it over here, and then the axillary nerve wraps up around the back of that shoulder joint as well. And remember, that axillary nerve is going to innervate our posterior shoulder and kind of help us abduct our shoulder away, right? We're taking it away out from the back and kind of that lateral, taking the shoulders out, right? That's what the axillary nerve is going to help us perform. And then the radial nerve is down here, right? Travels along the it travels along the radius. So let's zoom out and then zoom in. Here's the part of the radial nerve right there, but it actually is going to split up here, and we can see a portion of it right there as well. So there's two different branches to that radial nerve that we need to be aware of, right? One right here, and then one right here. And the radial nerve is going to innervate the posterior forearm compartment. So we've got the median nerve, which is going to innervate the anterior compartment of the forearm, and then the radial nerve, which is going to innervate that posterior compartment. Okay, next, I want to talk about the medial cord, right? The medial cord contains two different nerves as well. It contains the ulnar nerve and the median nerve yet again. Yes, the median nerve has struck twice. Okay, first let's talk about the ulnar nerve. So we're looking at the shoulder, this is an arm. We're looking at the whole arm. Zoom in, and if I'm looking ulnar side, I'm going to find this nerve right here on the ulna. It travels up and actually innervates our ring finger and pinky, but I can follow this nerve all the way up until where it branches, right? Kind of cool. That's where that cord actually branches off into the ulnar nerve and carries that nerve all the way down the arm so it can terminate in our ring finger and our pinky finger. Kind of cool, right? The ulnar nerve is also super sweet because it oftentimes is used to describe the funny bone, right? If you've ever taken your arm and you've hit that medial epicondyle on the table just right, you can hit that, you hit your ulnar nerve and cause a zinging sensation to occur to these, or to this side of your hand, right? The ring and pinky finger side of your hand. It's kind of cool, and lots of people have experienced that. So go ahead and try to hit your ulnar nerve a few times. Kind of cool. Anyway, don't forget, just because we've talked about it one time doesn't mean it hasn't disappeared, right? The median nerve still travels right along the center and innervates the anterior forearm compartment, also helping with some of those finger flexors. All right, let's go ahead and hop into the next section. Alrighty, I got a leg for you now, and let's go ahead and dive into the lumbar plexus. So the lumbar plexus is going to originate on L1 through L4. And the lumbar plexus, the first nerve that we want you to know from it is the femoral nerve. The femoral nerve travels along the anterior thigh compartment, and it branches into a whole bunch of other nerves. You can see it right there, right? This is that femoral nerve, and it branches into other nerves. All you need to know is that this is the femoral nerve, right? We don't need you to know, or we're not asking you to know all of these other smaller ones. Know that this is the femoral nerve. Okay. After that is the obturator nerve. The obturator nerve actually can't be seen on this model, and so the obturator nerve passes through the obturator foramen, right? And that obturator foramen is found, like if I had let's take a look at myself, right? I've got my two legs right here. If I were to take those two legs off, I've got my two acetabulums. Those are the hip sockets, right? And then there's the two holes next to my acetabulum right before the pubis. Those two holes are the obturator foramen, and they allow passageway for the obturator nerve. That obturator nerve is going to help with hip abduction, right? It helps all of those hip abductors kind of up in the thigh, right? And that in the upper part of our leg. The femoral nerve is going to innervate all of the anterior thigh muscles, so all of, like our rectus femoris, the quads, those muscles right here. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into the sacral plexus. It's the last bit for this lab, okay? Our last couple structures here for this lab. First is the sciatic nerve. So we're going to take this whole leg, and we're going to go from the anterior to the posterior side, and we're looking for the largest nerve on the model. It's right there. Oh yeah, it's super easy to see, right? The sciatic nerve is ridiculously huge. Oh man, it's very easy to find on most models, right? Travels down the posterior side of the leg, and the sciatic nerve is going to innervate the posterior leg compartment and also the entire lower leg. That's because all of the nerves that innervate the lower leg funnel back up into the sciatic nerve. And so the sciatic nerve is going to extend down until it hits this little fork in the road, and then The part that keeps going straight down is the tibial nerve. That's the part that stays going inferiorly. And then the part that branches off is the common fibular nerve, okay? The common fibular nerve is very important. It's going to wrap around the leg and actually perform a lot of innervation through two different nerves that I'm going to show you as well. But first, I want you to recognize we've got the tibial nerve that's going to travel straight off the sciatic all the way down the leg until it reaches the foot, and it actually helps with some of our foot innervation as well. All right, so now that we're done with the tibial nerve, let's go ahead and finish up with the common fibular nerve. And so the sciatic nerve runs down the posterior compartment of the thigh until it splits, right? It splits into the tibial nerve, which extends straight down into the foot, all the way down, right? And then we also have the common fibular nerve, which is the other fork in that road. And that common fibular nerve is actually going to wrap all the way around the knee, right? And innervate part of our lower leg. And so the superficial fibular nerve is going to innervate the lateral leg, and it stays kind of superficial and relative to some of our muscles and also the other nerve that we're going to talk about. And the only place where we can see the superficial fibular nerve is this lower region right here, right? The rest of it is actually covered up by this muscle right here. And so that is the superficial fibular nerve. And then the deep fibular nerve is going to extend anteriorly and actually innervate our anterior thigh compartment. And so we've got the superficial and the deep one right here. Superficial fibular nerve and deep fibular nerve that extends into the anterior cavity or anterior thigh compartment. I said thigh. Anterior leg compartment. Okay. Let's go ahead and talk about the superior gluteal nerve and the inferior gluteal nerve. Unfortunately, showing you this model right here, we can only see the superior gluteal nerve. That's this guy right here. That's the superior gluteal nerve, and the inferior gluteal nerve is actually going to extend up underneath this gluteus minimus, and we can't actually see it up underneath there. And so that's just the superior gluteal nerve, and the inferior gluteal is up underneath. The pendundal nerve is another nerve that you can't actually see on the models, but it wraps up and around our pubic bone and innervates the pelvic floor. It helps with some of our pelvic floor actions. And so that is all of our peripheral nervous system. Good luck on your quiz this week, and I'll see you for the next one.